Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the second lecture on the second of Marshall McLuhan's essays, the Gutenberg Galaxy and the Making of the Typographic Man. In the previous lecture, we looked at the previous essay, which is on medium is the message. Both the essays were written in the 1960s, which was the very early era of the electronic age, as one would say. Just to understand where we are going, I would like to recap a few points about the medium is the message. The principal reason why we are looking at both these essays is to understand the relationship between human beings and human society and technology. And in specifics, we are looking at technologies of communications. In our particular course, we are interested in technologies of writing, of recording ideas. What McLuhan is trying to assert, and in fact many others have also tried to assert, and we will look at some of those essays in this course, is that the development of technology bears a very strong relationship with the way human beings communicate, and way the communication is framed, and the way the communication is perceived and interpreted. This is a relationship which is very often lost upon people. People are while sending and receiving messages through text, through speech, they concentrate on the content of what is being said, rather and not on the form or the vehicle or the medium that is being used to send the message. And we are, just to remind you, we are interested in this entire history of communication and communication technologies, because our principal aim is to understand the present, the contemporary, the digital media, the advent of the digital media, and the sweeping changes that the digital media is bringing about in our human communication, and in fact in human society, human politics, economics, and every facet of life. So, without much ado, let us begin on understanding the essay. I strongly recommend that you read the essay, which has been provided in the reading list for better understanding, but for the moment I will explain to you what the salient points in the essay. McLuhan, to begin with, acknowledges that it is still early days into the electronic age, and very crucially he identifies that another period in human history which is comparable to that of the present is that of the Elizabethan age. Now, a little bit about the Elizabethan age. Those of you who are students of literature would know that when we talk about the Elizabethan age, we talk about the period of the reign of Queen Elizabeth I in England, which was towards the end of the 16th century and the very early part of the 17th century. And it is also variously known as the early modern age, the Renaissance, or even the Shakespearean age. Right. What is important for us to know about this age is that this was a period which, though students of literature would know it mostly for the plays of Shakespeare or the poetry of Spenser and again the plays of Johnson and others. However, it is important to remember that this was an age of tremendous growth, tremendous churning within British society, within English society and politics, and not only English politics, but also across Western Europe. we are going to study this at greater detail in later on in this course, but for the moment let me tell you that we would understand that there were a series of explorations that were undertaken by navigators, by explorers who tried to circumnavigate the world. It was not only Columbus, but many people from across each of the European nations who were in a scramble to find a new route around the world to Asia, and thereby they discovered the new what they called the New World, and that brought about a tremendous amount of opening of knowledge systems within Europe. It was also a period of new learning, as we all know it. There was a tremendous history growth of coming of the printing machine, tremendous growth of the number of availability of books, new universities were created, and not only that, people also link it to the growth of trade and commerce to an unprecedented scale. Along with that, this was also a period of scientific exploration. What I am going to try to demonstrate in this course is that all these changes, all these points that we discover as features of the Elizabethan age, so as it were all interlinked. They all facilitated each other. They did not grow independently of each other, and that's the story of which is fascinating, and that is what McLuhan is really trying to point towards, is that the sweeping changes that happened, that was seen within Western European society, and as we know, it's not merely Western European society. It is also that because of the history of colonialism and because of the growth of capitalism and imperialist commerce, these features of European society influenced modern societies across the world, right? So this kind of sweeping changes is something probably which we can see in present day society as well, if we look at it closely, right? So and in fact, through this course, this is what is going to be a mirror for us. What were the changes that came about in the early modern period? It is called the early modern period because it is in this period that we recognize some of the very important tenets of modern societies: democracy, science, rationality. These are some of the important capitalism. These are some of the important features that define modern societies, and these took their form, struck roots at around this period. And it did not develop in a day, it developed over the next several centuries, but the first signs of such a change in the world really could be observed or seen during this period. So if the changes of a certain technological nature, of a change of a certain communication technology brought about such sweeping changes during the early modern Elizabethan period, then we can only conjecture as to what kind of sweeping changes our own contemporary societies are undergoing. So he says that he says that we are still early days into the electronic age. I'd like to remind you, he is talking about in the 1960s. We have moved beyond some 50 to 60 years after the writing of this essay, and we would still say we are well and truly into the digital age, but we still don't know how much more we have to see. So we can hold McLuhan's essay, McLuhan's point to be true even today, right? So he says that we are as early into the electronic age. We have not seen the full growth of the electronic age. We can only see the first features, the first very development of the electronic age, as the Elizabethans were into the typographic and the mechanical age. Now, so he says that it is in the Elizabethan era that we see the beginnings of the typographic and the mechanical age. Now, What are these two terms, typographic and mechanical? The mechanical is much more easily understood. It is the use of machines. For the first time, human beings started doing work using machines. Before that, everything was done manually. The creation of machines to do something, do work is a result of scientific development, is a result of research within the field of science, and development of technologies through which you cater to more mass production of various goods in the world, including that of books and the methods of recording and communicating ideas. Before that, it would all be manually done. Now, what is the machine that is used for mechanizing communication? We all know it is the printing machine. The printing machine, one of the earliest printing machines. If you study the history of the printing machine, in fact, we are going to study the history of the printing machine in this course. While we are through the lectures of this course, we would find that the increased need of books required a large number of copies of a certain book to be available, because there would be students who would be wanting to read them. Although one would say that that is nowhere in comparison to what kind of need and the market for books that we have today, but it was a tremendous growth. The world saw a tremendous, the European society saw a tremendous growth in the demand for books at around the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries. And manually, earlier there would be just the only method of reproducing books would be through manual copying, through manuscripts, through scribes, those who write books. And that, as we all understand, is a slow process. So there was always one in the lookout for creation of a more efficient and better mechanism through which more books could be made available at a cheaper cost and at a faster rate. So one of the innovations that Gutenberg is ascribed to Gutenberg is the creation of the movable type. So as you can see on your screen, this is example of how the earliest printing machines actually operated. You had these types, each individual typeface, which is put together, which are composed in lines, and then an impression is taken, right? That makes it really efficient. Before Gutenberg, people would try to create one entire page carved out of wood or metal, and that was a very inefficient way of working, very slow process of working, because you could not reuse the same set of types for another page. So the labor involved in creation of a full impression of a page would be much more inefficient. Whereas the creation of the movable type, it's movable because each of the pieces can be taken apart and put in a box and reused later on. That is the innovation. That is the innovation which led to the rise of the modern printing machine. That innovation is what is defined as the creation of the typograph. This is the typographic method of printing, and therefore this age is also called the typographic age. And that is what McLuhan is referring to when he is talking about the typographic or the mechanical age. So this was a very early period of the typographic age that the Elizabethans were into, and he is trying to refer to that. And what he is trying to suggest is that there are certain changes that came about when the human beings became typographic. Now, when I say typographic, you must understand that you must understand certain terms. We talk about the oral world, so we are going to look at various broad epochs of writing technologies or communication technologies. Not only writing, because we are also talking about orality. So you had the oral world, the bardic world, where communication was primarily through oral means. Poems would be passed down generation on generation without anything written. without any scriptures, because human beings started speaking, talking much before writing was even invented. So if we talk about the talk about the invention of writing, it's only about 5 to 8,000 years old in various cultures, in various forms, and the alphabet is much more much closer. It's maybe about 3 to 4,000 years old, the earliest forms of alphabetic writing, and the creation of the vowel is even more new. So when we are talking about the entire expanse of the of human society, human civilization, our communication technologies are very new compared to that. It's a very small period of the entire period of human communication. So before the invention of writing, human beings would be communicating through oral means. So that is one phase. The second phase is the phase where people started writing. The earliest writing were pictographic writing, I mean in the form of maybe cave drawings. That's the mechanism of communication, but we are talking of more things where cuneiform writing or hieroglyphics, which were used to communicate through symbolic symbols. That period, and after that, when alphabet was discovered, was developed, that led to manuscript writing. Paper was a much later discovery. This entire period where people are writing by hand, using the hand. Remember, I told you in the previous class about how the shape of the human hand allows us to hold tools of various kinds, weapons, tools to create, to hunt, tools to cook, tools to create other tools, and of course tools of writing. So therefore, so that period where human beings are writing manually is called the chirographic age, followed by the typographic age, where people are writing using machines, using the typograph, using the movable type. That's the typographic age. And the typographic age follows into what McLuhan calls the electronic age, but I think we will make a distinction between McLuhan's understanding of the electronic age and our understanding of the digital world, because McLuhan did not have too much of an inkling into what the digital age is really all about. He was looking more at the transmission of radio and television, but there is a linkage. But the radio and television, we can still say, is part of the mechanical era, because the TV cameras and other and the radio, they were mechanical devices to begin with in the 1960s. The era of digital recording really begins a little after that, and certainly the coming of the internet really revolutionizes the way the world communicates. So he says that during the typographic period, when the coming of the typographic period, or the early typographic period, which is the early modern age or early modern era, a distinction was happening between human experience as a corporate experience and human experience as modern individualism. Now, just to explain this issue a little bit, one of the when I was discussing the facets or the features of modernity, among the various other things like colonialism, capitalism, democracy, one of the important facets is also the rise of the individual. The idea of that the individual is at the center of the universe, that the individual is what is driving growth. Very important, very much interlinked to the question of to the way the operations of capitalism, because it is the individual who is granted the right to property, the individual who is granted the right, who is granted the will to invest and reap profits from that investment. So, individualism becomes a very important characteristic of modernity. Before that, you would have more clan identities, more tribal identities, where people would identify themselves not as separate from their clans, as part of their clans. So, it was a more corporate experience. of a group of people, a community together, all right. So, that distinction where the individual branches out of the of that corporate existence and strikes an individual fate for oneself. Very important to understand the kind of characters, it is easily understood from the kind of characters that we encounter in the literature of this period. If you look at Robinson Crusoe, for example, Crusoe is someone who was fated to be a clergyman, but he then moves out of his house and he is probably the second or third son of his family, and he moves out against his father's wishes, against the corporate notions of what his duties and responsibilities are, and he tries to chart a career, an experience for himself, and that is the risk taking that he undertakes. A second example, that of Macbeth, for example, Shakespeare's tragedy, Macbeth. Now, in Macbeth we find in the very first second scene, we find when Ross comes in, tells Duncan of the heroics of Macbeth, of what Macbeth has achieved in the battlefield. He has shown quality. He has protected his entire people. He has fought very hard and very bravely, and he has shown us. What we see on picture is this. There is this character of Duncan, who is the king, and he is an old man, right, frail man, certainly not someone who can protect his people from the invaders, from their enemies who are attacking Scotland at that point of time. And it is Macbeth who is protecting. Now, if you understand the responsibilities and duties of the king, then one of the things that the audience would understand is that Macbeth is perhaps much better suited to be king than Duncan, but he does not have the necessary qualifications. He has the abilities, but he does not have the necessary sanctions, because he is not born into the royal family. He is not. It is in the hereditary, in the system, monarchical system. You have the understanding that the king's son will become king, and that is how the inheritance actually operates. And then when Macbeth becomes king through whichever means, then the entire universe sort of conspires against him. The entire universe tries to set it right, ultimately till Malcolm becomes the king, and Macbeth is removed from the world. He has to give up his life, and then order is restored. Order as in the what is seen as proper, right? So here we see a very interesting conflict between feudal societies, this corporate experience, where there is I mean, Macbeth, though he is very capable, he has the abilities, but his fate will not be determined on the basis of his abilities, but rather on the basis of his place within that corporate world, which is that maximum of what Duncan gives to him, that he is the Thane of Cawdor, right. That is his place within the corporate experience. But Macbeth tries to branch out. Macbeth tries to move out and become that individual who goes and gets things for himself, who takes risks, who wants to achieve beyond what the fates have ordained for him, what sanction has ordained for him, what he is slated to do by birth, to have by birth. All right. So, and there are many stories within this early modern Elizabethan period where we can trace the same trajectory, of this conflict between the individual and the larger society. The society which is still very much within a corporate experience, but now we are producing these men of and primarily men. No, it's a very patriarchal world. So, we do not see too many women figures, though there are some exceptions, but that will probably be discussed in some other course. But you had these characters, these people who would try to live an individual life, a life, and chart their own careers, their own histories of development. So, that is something that McLuhan identifies is that which is an important facet of this period, the early modern period. And he says, on one hand you have the movement from the chirographic, the manuscript world, to the mechanical age, the typographic world, and on the other hand from the corporate experience to individual experience, right. And he is seeing a link between the two. Let us see what he further has to say. All right. So, and he looks at a series of changes that took place. It is also a period where there is a transition from natural economy or barter economy to money economy. The idea of money really starts developing. Now, you would say no, it is not only in the Elizabethan period that we had coins printed. I mean, coins were printed even much earlier in history. But the nature of money in the Elizabethan period and the nature of money before that, the nature of coins before that, the coins operated before that were very different. Earlier coins would be made of valuable metal, right, gold or silver, and the value of the coin is exactly the value of what the gold is or what the silver is, right. So, it was still, though you are functioning through coins, you are actually, it is still a barter economy. Whereas, what happens in a money economy, if you just pull out any currency, you would find there is a note from the governor of the Reserve Bank who says that I promise to pay the bearer a sum of 10 rupees or 20 rupees or 30 rupees, or sorry, there is no 30 rupees, but 50 rupees or 100 rupees or whatever, which means that note which is there, that currency note, is not worth 10 rupees till the Reserve Bank guarantees that amount. Okay. That note itself, actually that piece of paper costs much less than the 500 rupees or the 2000 rupees, the note that you see. It is the guarantee, it is the bank guarantee which is written there, that bill. That is what lends the value to that currency note. That person A knows that when I go and offer this note to person B cannot refuse because the Reserve Bank is guaranteeing it. All of us have gone through the history of demonetization, and what is demonetization? Demonetization actually is where these notes were demonetized. The Reserve Bank withdrew. He said, we had promised you that this is a 500 rupee note and this is a 1000 rupee note. We are withdrawing that promise. Today, those notes are just worth the piece of paper. It is not worth 500 rupees or 1000 rupees. That is what is the money economy, the movement from the natural economy to the money economy, because what is crucial here is the mechanization of the production of the coins and the notes, which leads to kind of a mass creation of currency. Okay. And he says that this is not simply a technical matter. This is not merely a matter of how a currency note is printed, whether it is printed out of gold or silver, but it is it talks about the social function of money, that money has a social function, it creates a social structure. This kind of an economy can only be sustained by a social structure that functions within a money economy rather than a barter economy. What does he mean by that? He means that it is only possible within modern institutions, where you have institutions which support a money economy. Very importantly, banks. Without the creation of banks, without the guarantee of these social institutions, you do not have a structure that will support a money economy. And many of these institutions, which are modern institutions, actually start coming into being at around this point of time. So, he says this is not merely a technical matter. Earlier, so if you had gold coins, for example, just understand this. If you had gold coins, and gold coins are minted by one particular kingdom, one particular place, and but you go to another kingdom, the gold value of gold still retains its value, right? Whereas in a money economy, the notes that are printed within a certain country may not hold a value in another country unless there is an exchange that is worked out, isn't it? So, this now gets linked to the creation of nation states, right? A kind of relationships between exchange states, between nation states, some kind of exchange rates and other things which are other rules and laws which govern the circulation of money. This is not true of the barter economy, right. So, this is not simply a technical matter, and just to remind you of the previous essay by McLuhan, where McLuhan talks about the technology not being merely an academic matter. Technology actually brings about, like he talks about electricity, how electricity actually changes the way human beings relate to each other and changes the nature of the human society altogether, right. So, that is what he is pointing out towards, right. Now, he also focuses on the use of the term literature. Now, he says oral literature. Now, before this you had the chirographic world, before that before the typographic there was the chirographic methods of reproduction of literature, of ideas, but previous to that you had orality. Now, we use the term oral literature. He says oral literature is a contradiction in terms, because the word literature presupposes the use of letters. It assumes verbal works, works which are written through words, through alphabet, but oral literature is something that is written. In fact, oral works did survive, were present even before the development of the alphabet. So, you cannot have oral literature, it is oral works which are something that people listen to, right. Very important to note that when we talk about the oral world, we talk about a world that is what is the idea? When we utter a certain word, let us say tree, the word tree brings in the sounds ta, ra, e. Now, this combination produces in the mind's eye the idea of what the tree is, right. There is, so it is the sound tree. This is something that we in today's world we will not be able to fathom, because the moment I say the word tree, what you think of is TREE. You do not think, the first thing that we do not think of is the tree out there. Some of us may, but we cannot not think of TREE as well, even if you think of the physical tree that is outside. So that is, so we are moving with the development of the alphabet from oral space, sound, to a visual space, that which we see, that the symbolism shifts from the oral space to the visual space. That is something that we need to keep in mind. He then goes back to the same point of previously what we saw in the previous essay, that human beings being tool making animals, and tools are an extension of sense organs. Now, when we talk about extension of sense organs, we are also talking about extension of organs which are used for communication, speech and writing and radio. These are extensions, right. Weapons are an extension of our limbs, and we can talk about nuclear weapons or biological. The body has a mechanism of controlling temperature, uh, uh, clothes and houses are an extension of the human body's ability to control temperature. Labor, the way now what happens with technology is that money is, if we look at money as a technology, money is a way of storing labor, of extending labor. I work hard, I get some money, and I can keep it for other things, right. So, I store my labor power in the form of money, or I have money, I can buy somebody else's labor power, right. So, or I work hard, or I'm a good craftsman, but I also need to buy maybe wheat from the market. I can't produce wheat, my labor power cannot do that. So, I use the money of my craftsmanship, produced through my craftsmanship, to buy another skill, that is production of wheat. All right. So, that is what technology does. Technology extends our organs. TV and telephone, he says, is an extension of voice. Language itself he identifies as a speech tool, the way we have understood, because language really, language is not a natural thing. Language is something we acquire. When a child is born, the child learns the language, and we are able to understand each other because that language actually exists between us. Language does not emanate from me, language does not emanate for you. I am aware what language you might understand, and you are aware of what language I might be able to put together. Therefore, we sit across the screen and we interact, and the language actually exists between us, right. So, speech is a tool, and what language does, it allows us to accumulate experience and knowledge. What I am transmitting through this lecture today is a certain experience, certain degree of knowledge which I hope I have, and which I would have spent many more hours acquiring, which you are getting within the space of a lecture or a course. When you read a book, someone may have researched that book for many months or years, and by reading that book you gather that experience, you accumulate that experience within the space of a few hours or a few days. So, it translates. So, language allows us, not only, it is not merely communication, but it allows us to move experience from one mode to another mode. All right. So, he says that new technologies deeply affect traditional operation. When technologies change, things undergo a sea change altogether. It is not merely a change of technology, but the way we operate, it affects the way we operate altogether. Okay. And he says that each technology actually alters the ratio among the senses, and this is very crucial. We just talked about how the word tree, when it is spoken, when it is pronounced in a oral world, it reminds people of the tree through the utterance of those sound forms, right. Whereas, in a chirographic world or a typographic world, you look at the visual shape of the word itself. All right, you imagine in your mind's eye the visual shape of the word. So, therefore, the ratio among the senses is altered, whereas in the oral world you had the ear playing a very important role. In the chirographic world or even the typographic world, the visual space plays a far more important role. In fact, with the coming of print, and in the advanced stages of the manuscript universe, had the development of silent reading, where it would not be uttered, the word would not be uttered. So, the relationship, the ratio between the ear and the eyes in the understanding of the word tree has undergone a change because of a change of technology. And typographic culture brings about a very different kind of practice. Just to give you a pointer, and we will discuss this later on when we look at things in the next few lectures, we will see how in a oral universe you can only partake of ideas or experience in the presence of the speaker. all right. Whereas, in the print universe, I write a book and it gets printed and the book travels without me. I am not required to be present there, right. Now, look at this particular lecture. If it were a live lecture, we would say at least we inhabit the same temporal sort of space. The same time we exist. I am on this side of this camera, you are on the other side of the screen, and you communicate with me. Maybe if there was a mechanism through which I could see you and it could be a two-way process, then one would say one is existing in the same time, though across various geographies. But in this particular case, look at it. This once this lecture is recorded, I do not even know who is going to register for the course right now, right. But I am speaking to you, I mean speaking to an audience who has yet to come into existence, isn't it? So, the technology of this recording device that is there before me, the camera, and the transmission device that is there, the internet, is making it possible for me to have an audience who are yet to come into being, right. So, therefore, it is a different kind, it brings in a different kind of relationship between me and you, which would not have been the case with other kinds of technology. Suppose I had put all these ideas in the form of a textbook. The textbook would behave very differently from the way in a textbook you would not see me. You would not see me moving my hands around, you would not see me, you would not hear my voice, you would not see me moving my lips. So, each technology operates very, very differently. And he says one of the important facets of, and now he is returning to the modern times, to the contemporary times, he says electronic technologies, you move from the auditory domain to the visual domain. What does it mean? Certainly, one point that needs to be understood here is that when certain words are used, they can be used in different senses across different contexts. Now, we already said that the movement from the oral to the chirographic or the typographic world is a movement from the oral to the visual, because you see the word tree written on a white space of paper. But what is important to understand, it is not a complete separation from the oral altogether, because even when we are reading something silently, we are reading it in our mind's ear. Okay? We are actually reading it out silently. We are voicing those words as if we are speaking. So, it is oral. But when you are seeing something on a television screen, you are not, when we are looking at a painting or we are watching cinema or a television, then it is part of it is not an articulation of a silent reading, it is purely visual. There could be an image on the screen which is purely visual, like imagine for example, the distinction between this image and what you are seeing here. Here, because there are texts in this one, because there is text written on it, you would be reading and articulating it in your mind. All right. Part of it is all the tree, the mind mapping, which is purely visual, but because there is text on it, you will see it. But if it is another image, a painting, then it is visual, because you are not reading it out, you are not articulating the sound of it in your mind. So, that is what he is saying, that the electronic medium moves to the visual. He is talking about television here, right. And then he makes a very crucial point, which he is going to elaborate in some time. Says, contrary to what commonsensically you would say, he says that the electronic world actually places and this world actually places the Western world at a disadvantage over what he calls within quotation marks, of course, backward countries, because backward countries is something he relates to the oral universe, the distinction between the oral universe and the print universe. Why he says that is something that we are going to come to in a moment. All right. Let us not discuss that right now, because we are going to discuss it at greater length in a little while. All right. So, let us move to the next part of the discussion, which is he takes on the philosopher Karl Popper, and he discusses the distinction between tribal societies, and that is the distinction between modern societies and tribal societies. This is, tribal societies are closed societies and modern societies are open societies. Tribal societies have a biological unity, whereas modern societies function through abstract relations. So, now what does it mean? In tribal society, they are closed societies, right? They are small close knit societies. This is the corporate universe that he is talking about. They have a biological unit. People live together. People see each other. Like, it is not like across a camera. It is not across a screen. You actually see your teacher. You live in the same space, right? So, that is what he means by biological unit. People are born together, they die together. And it is not merely the relationship between teacher and student in your university or in your school, for example. You go to a school, the teacher comes there to work, and the teacher goes away and you go away. The teacher may be teaching there for 20 years, but a student in a college is studying only for 3 years, right, and that student goes away. But imagine if you were to live your life completely in a village or a tribe where you were born, the teacher was there, and when the teacher dies, the student is there, or whichever way it is. They live their lives together, live their entire universe together. It is a closed universe, right, and there is biological unity. We live with each other. It is not an institutional unity, right. When I teach in my institute and there are students, I see them for a course. I may see them for a couple of years. After that, they are gone. Then they only exist through correspondence. There is no biological, no endemic unity between us. It is merely through abstract notions, through institutions. These are more institutional relationships. So, he says that taking on Karl Popper, he argues that these tribal closed societies function on the basis of corporate values, whereas modern and open societies function through competitive individualism, points that I have already made. And he explains what we mean by corporate values. He says man or human beings look upon themselves as part of a much larger organism. They are not independent unit, not self-reliant, but part of a clan or a family or other larger entities. Whereas in modern individualism, there is the individual is existing separately, and there is a functioning of exchange, cooperation. The relationship is that of exchange, not a biological unity, but that of exchange between teacher and student, between boss and employee, employer and employee, between the member of parliament and the electorate. You know, it is fragmented, isn't it? To a certain person, I am so to the shopkeeper, to the person in the shop, I am a customer, whereas to my colleagues, I am a co-worker, right. The same person has different facets, whereas in a corporate entity, I am completely what I am with another person who is completely what he or she is with me. We see everything about that person, isn't it? And just imagine your relationship with the members of your family, from your relationship with your classmates, for example. It's a very different kind of a relationship. You know a lot more about members of your family than you will ever know about your classmates, maybe. Now, mostly that would be the case. There would be exceptions, but our engagement in the institutional space of a college or a school is example of a modern society, whereas our existence within the family space is an example of the tribal or clan modes of existence. Now, what we see he now is going to take this distinction further, and he is going to say that within feudalism you had a situation. He is talking about power, he is talking about politics. The feudal monarch was inclusive, including all his subjects in his person. What does it mean? What do we mean by this? When you, I hope you have heard of the term the royal plural. The royal plural, that is, when the king speaks, we shall visit the sea tomorrow, or something. He uses the word we, because the feudal monarch, within his own understanding of himself, he includes all his subjects. Okay, it's the way the language operates. So the fate of the monarch is linked to the fate of the people, and the fate of the people is linked to the fate of the monarch. They are not separate from each other. Whereas in modern societies, you have entities of in power who are in a republic is basically that, where you have that the power is not, the head of state is not hereditary, but is decided through constitutional means. There is constitutional rule. So therefore, the person who is ruling the country, who is only holding an office, is not actually holding power by himself or herself. Whereas in case of monarchy, the feudal monarch was holding power, the entire power, to himself or herself. And another crucial distinction may probably make it very much clearer to you, is that the distinction between feudal monarchy and the modern ruler, the democratic world, is that brought about by the rule of law. With the rule of law, you have the law is greater. The law is above that of the ruler completely. All right. So in the case of a feudal monarch, it will be the prince or the king who would decide what the resolution to a particular matter would be. He could be arbitrary, he could decide on his own. The court, he would be the supreme authority altogether. Whereas, if you look at a constitutional world, there is a constitution, there is a set of laws, there are a set of laws, and the judiciary is that. So there is a separation of powers, and it is the judiciary which decides on what is right and what is wrong, how a particular dispute is going to be decided, what is the quantum of punishment that would be given, right. So therefore, that is a very, very important distinction between office and authority. That distinction comes about in the modern period. All right. And the most crucial distinction for us is the distinction between the oral universe and the print or written universe. And here he is trying to work with the distinction with the Western child and the African child, with caveats. One would say that because in the 1960s, one would say that the spread of Western technologies and Western institutions were still very limited within Africa. So McLuhan takes it to be a very apt example, though Africa was and the various African countries and societies are perhaps as much modern as that of Europe today. But McLuhan in this essay makes that distinction between he relates the African world with orality and the Western world with written and print universe. We shall not go into the politics of this distinction, that this relationship that McLuhan draws, because that would only draw away from the moot point that he makes. I am not absolving McLuhan of anything, but I think we need to get on with it and discuss what is the point about technology that McLuhan is making. He says, for the African child, education depends upon the spoken word, whereas for the Western child, the Western child is introduced to mechanical causation. So, for the African child, for example, water is something that flows in the streams or flows down during rain or comes out of caverns. But for the Western child, the first introduction to water is through water taps. It's a mechanical. So it's like this. When we many of us who are urban bred, we would encounter food on our plates and we think food comes from the kitchen, or that food is produced in the market. Whereas for a child who is more within the likely to be in the more traditional oral universe, would see that food is actually produced on the field, in the farm. So, there is that disjuncture between the biological world and the mechanical world. All right. So, in the oral universe, the concept of literary property did not exist. Why? Because when I come and tell you a story, I am not bothered about whether I have written the story or not, because you want to listen to a story told by me. The same story told by another person may not be that interesting to you, because you are not only interested in the way in what this content is, but the way the story is being told. So, the concept of literary property actually did not exist, and this actually continued into the manuscript domain, as he says, because even when manuscripts were principally produced in order as a mnemonic tool, as a way to help the orator remember the next line or the next sentence or the next idea. And you have this even today in our societies, where there would be a manuscript which would be read out during various rituals. And the priest would read out from a certain book or something, but it is actually orated. Imagine people who are reading the Hanuman Chalisa, for example. It's not to be merely read in the mind. Very, even though without actually uttering a sound, people are supposed to read it. But that is a practice of the early manuscript world, where manuscripts were merely a way to remember things, and they come into existence only in the utterance of it. And what happens in this, as I said, that when somebody is speaking, what is carried with it is not merely the words or the meaning of the words, but also the meaning of the gestures, the expressions. When someone is telling you a story, the way their mannerisms are, that conveys a lot of sense into what the audience understands. All right. So, the belief, and this is a universe in a world where the belief resides in what is heard and what is said. So, the word is directed at the listener, not at the written work. All right. Whereas in the Western world, seeing is believing. In the oral universe, hearing is believing. I have heard about this compared to I have seen it. There is that distinction. And he says that non-literate people, those who believe in the spoken word rather than the written word, they would identify more closely with the world that they live in, because it is a more biological unit. I would relate much closely with the tree, because that printed word TREE does not stand between me and the tree. The tree is right there. I understand what a tree is. Okay. And he takes on a few more examples. Like, for example, he says that in Russia, which was at that point of time largely an oral world, spying was not through the eye, but through the ear. People would hear things. People evidence would be on the basis of whether you have heard him say so. Whereas, if in modern mechanisms of spying, people will take photographs or photocopies which would be passed around. So, you need some visual evidence of everything, but early days of Russian espionage, spying was primarily through whether you hear something across the wall. That is something that is very important. All right. So, I think we can stop there for today, and we will take on the rest of the essay in the next lecture.